What's going on, fellow A-plussers? It's your boy Adam Perez back once again with a brand new episode as we are set to get into episode number 5 of Andor, ladies and gentlemen. That's right. We are 5 episodes deep into the most recent Star Wars series, ladies and gentlemen. They actually debuted with 3 episodes at once. Last week we had episode 4. Now it's episode number 5. And honestly, while I certainly enjoyed this episode, to certainly say the least, I was a little bit disappointed that in this week's episode, we didn't just dive into the heist. The way that the previous episode left me standing, thinking that everybody was going over their plans, sitting around the campfire, getting ready for to go ahead and certainly pull this off. I was expecting this episode for them to get on with the mission, but it certainly seems as though we've got at least maybe one more episode before they dive into that. I'm assuming next week's episode is when we really get into the heist. I mean, in this episode, we pretty much saw them walking through their game plan, making sure that Andor knew all the steps of the way, whether that was standing like a soldier, learning to march like a soldier, knowing who to stand behind when they're certainly going to be going into the depths of the Empire encampment and things like that later on. Even going over the game plan in regards to getting the vehicle out of that particular tunnel, which was eye-opening in and of itself. And it kind of actually showed you why they needed Andor in the first place, kind of asking them some questions in regards to how do you calibrate the weight. Clearly, this is something that they probably should have known, that Andor thought that they certainly knew, because he clearly is the only person that knows how to handle this situation, or at least pilot this particular vehicle to safety. So, I mean, he even asks them, like, what would you guys have done if I wasn't here, right? Like, you want to talk about a mission fail. They probably seriously would have had a huge mission fail if Andor certainly wasn't there. Now, listen, we haven't even gotten into the heist yet. And even after this episode, I find myself asking the question of, who's making it out of this alive, right? Like, I clearly know Andor certainly survives this because we see him again all the way in Rogue One. So we know that there's no real stakes, at least in regards to his life here when it comes to Andor. But I do wonder who the rest out of this little small cell of rebels will actually make it out of here alive. Or does everybody die and Andor be the only person to survive? So I am going to be really fascinated to see how exactly they pull this off. And if you ask me, like, despite me being bummed that they didn't necessarily get into the heist in this episode, the tensions and the nerves for everybody was definitely high in this area. I feel like they really focused on Andor along with his cell of rebels. And then we got like little brief honorable mentions and clips of other characters here or there, like Mothma, Syril a little bit. And there was somebody else that I was going to go ahead and certainly talk with you guys about in regards to that. Who was the other person? Dedra, the Imperial officer. We'll definitely talk about her in just a little bit. But for me, it was really cool getting the opportunity in this episode to see how I get to learn a little bit more about who Andor is certainly fighting against. And I felt like this was a great opportunity for them to showcase why they're fighting for the rebellion, or why they're a part of this mission in general, right? There are 3 characters, or a couple characters, that really stood out to me this week. Skeen, along with Nemec, and then Lieutenant Gorn, who is in fact the Imperial officer that's given them sort of the insight, if you will. And so for Skeen, I think he kind of mentions well, one thing I really enjoyed to see was just the parallels, or how much Andor and Skeen certainly had in common in regards to like their upbringing or their back life, right? Like, Skeen clearly has been through his fellow thing, his own group of things, whether that be going from gangs or stuck inside of some sort of encampment sort of thing, right? The tattoos kind of give it away. It was pretty neat getting the opportunity to see him and Andor talking about some things, having some things in common that they probably never thought that they certainly would. So you get to clearly understand that they definitely have had a very rough upbringing. And it's really not until Skeen talks about why he's here. And I think Vel, the leader, has him explain to Andor exactly why he's here. And he mentions the idea that he lost his brother, that his brother killed himself because the Empire came over and not only took his land, but also flooded his land and really left him with nothing. And so when he didn't have anywhere else to certainly turn to, I think Skeen mentions that he filled his pockets and his shirt with like stones and literally threw himself into a lake and just kind of sank to the bottom and drowned himself. Just absolutely terrible stuff. But it goes to show you the impact that the Empire certainly has on people in the world, and what that impact has on these people's families, and really what it drives them to do, right? Who else do we got here? We also have, Lieutenant Gorn. It looks as though, and I wish Lieutenant Gorn had told us this story, but it was Vel who told us this story, why an Imperial officer is helping them, because of the fact that he fell in love with one of the natives, the Donnies, and the Empire found out about it. So they told them they couldn't be together anymore. So this person he fell in love with, they couldn't see each other anymore. And I believe even this woman that he loved either perished or died or whatever the case may be. And it really drove him to not liking being a part of the Empire. And you can kind of see that in this episode too, when he's kind of talking to one of the other officers that are on top of the dam overlooking Aldani, and the guy talks about the idea of like, oh man, he really talking down about the Donnies, and you can really just see the look on Lieutenant Gorn's face that he's just not super pleased. And I was wondering why he was looking that type of way, or why he felt a certain type of way about this other Imperial officer sort of like degrading the Donnies. And it's because of the fact that he loved one himself, right? That he was very much attached and in love with one. And so to hear somebody else talking down about those people, yeah, it makes him feel some type of way. You know what I mean? And so he definitely is kind of pushing back against the Empire. And so I just think the idea of understanding and seeing why people are joining the rebellion in the first place, I think is something that opens Andor up to the idea of at least expressing why he certainly is joining this particular mission in the first place. I mean, don't get me wrong, he gets busted first, right? Like Skeen discovers the sky kyber crystal that he's certainly rocking, a very expensive piece of jewelry, apparently worth like 30,000 credits or whatever the case may be. So Skeen and everybody else has already had their eye on Andor and kind of wondering like, what are you doing here, right? Like, you've been this last minute addition. And I would assume that him hearing so many people's stories and being accused of something is a really great way for him to kind of come out of his own shell and just explain to people like, look, you guys are clearly trying to get rid of me. You guys are clearly afraid. So let me just be outright and tell you why I'm here. And he just mentions the idea that, look, I'm getting paid to do this job. Like, I'm getting paid credit simply because of the fact of how incredibly dangerous this mission is. And what I found interesting too was that how he kind of turns it around on everybody. He's like, look, man, I've been here for a couple days. You guys have brought me in. You've been training me. You've been getting me ready, right? And now, just before we're about to go ahead and embark on this mission, now you kind of want to find fault and for some reason and not to trust me. It kind of feels like you're using some excuses here, right? Like, there's a difference between being nervous and being afraid to the point of wanting an excuse to not go on the mission anymore, sort of thing, to the point of not doing your job. And so I do love the fact that Andor kind of just calls Skeen out on it. Like, I know you're just trying to get rid of me. Like, do you want to go on this mission or not? Are you up for this mission? And it seems as though Andor is one of the few that certainly has the nerves of steel to what looks to be a suicide mission. And I think everybody in that encampment knows that, to still be able to push forward through it. And so I thought it was just a really eye-opening moment, not only for Skeen, but the rest of the group, to the point to where by the end of this episode, we got Skeen coming up to him and apologizing, if you will, for what's certainly about to for his attack and pulling his knife out and things like that. It's been tense this episode. This episode was certainly tense between a lot of these characters, and you got to understand, with their nerves continuing to climb and build before this particular mission, you already have people that are teaming up that either don't know each other before this mission. Andor coming in very last minute sort of thing is definitely going to ask for a bunch of question marks. But I thought the tension was up all episode long. I thought Tony Gilroy, I think it was Dan Gilroy who wrote it. I can't remember who the director was. They definitely brought a level of tension here, especially with the flybys from the TIE fighters in this episode, like some close calls, like that TIE fighter that comes in across the mountain. I honestly thought it was going to start laying down some firepower and things like that. But unfortunately, it was just a scout, clearly just going by. And I don't know if he even announced it to anybody that he saw these people out in the out in the mountains or not. But we'll see if the Empire is ready for them or if this is going to be a complete surprise. But it definitely feels as though in next week's episode, Andor and the rest of his crew are definitely going to be going on this mission. Lieutenant Gorn, he seems like he's doing his part to kind of free up that particular area that's about to get heisted for the very next evening. It looks like he even mentions when he's talking to some of his generals or whoever his fellow officers, that he's trying to make the tomorrow evening shift very light, not having many people there whatsoever, even allowing people to be outside instead of inside to go ahead and watch the eye, that gigantic storm that there's certainly been talking about. And so it seems like Gorn is definitely doing his part to get everything ready for the heist that's certainly about to go down. But the big question always tends to be, what's going to go wrong? You know what I mean? Like I'm predicting at least something is definitely going to go wrong, whether they get caught or just things just don't necessarily go very smoothly. But I do plan. I hope that they certainly pull this off. But it should be a pretty intense episode, to certainly say the least. What other characters? I really enjoyed the conversation that Andor wind up having in here with Nemec. Anytime I hear Namek, I think of Namek from Dragon Ball Z. Like, why isn't this guy green? But the Namek kid is really kind of growing on me. I really enjoy just hearing him talk a little bit about the influences that the Empire certainly has over the people, the suppression, right, or the repression of people's rights while they go about and kind of do their own thing. Like Skeen even mentions that Namek has a manifesto that he's writing, and if I could be honest, I really want to read this manifesto. I'm kind of curious if he goes on to be somebody popular in Star Wars, an important figure, somebody that voices their opinion vocally and outwardly against the Empire. But it seems as though he's putting together a manifesto, and I just really appreciated just seeing his mental aspect, how really fully into being a part of the rebellion and believing in the cause that he certainly is. Like even trying to talk a little bit to Andor, showing him the navigating tool compared to what the Empire certainly has, emphasizing the idea that we've become so reliant on Imperial tech and what they've given us, that we've kind of lost our concept and ideas of freedom, that they have been so repressive to people's rights and have been taking things away and then sort of flood you with a bunch of like either fake news or lies, like 40 other incidents, right, to kind of keep you and your mind away from the actual problem that's definitely at hand. And that's how the Empire certainly works. It sounds kind of familiar these days, doesn't it? But that's how the Empire works. And so for me, great dialogue in here. I think Stuart on his Twitter account even mentioned the idea this is probably some of the best dialogue that he's seen in the Star Wars series. And that's because it's a grown-up Star Wars series. It's definitely different from, say, an Obi-Wan Kenobi series, a Book of Boba Fett, or even The Mandalorian. All clearly, certainly their own type of Star Wars. But when it comes to Andor, very much grown up into that spy espionage thriller kind of mindset. And, when you're dealing with people that are fighting it back against a very repressive empire, you're definitely going to have for some great and thoughtful and insightful conversations and dialogue. And I thought they did a great job when it comes to the storytelling in here as well. It's a very weird way of being able to mirror our world compared to what's going on in the world of Star Wars these days. Who else really jumped out to me? This Syril character, this Imperial officer or police officer that wound up getting fired from his job, and poor homeboy had to go back to his mom I mean, the condescendingness towards each other and just the mockery I'm assuming this is his mom, from mother to son and son to mother was just awkward table conversations. I clearly did not have a great childhood growing up in this particular household. And I've been kind of curious to know like what Cyril's motives are going to be in this series. Like he just seems so I don't know where his storyline is certainly headed, but it seems as though he certainly still has his mindset focused on Andor. I mean, despite the conversations with his mother in here, the idea of him not having a job or any prospects or anything to look forward to, it feels very much like the only thing he is focused on is Andor as he winds up opening up the holographic image of Andor and still kind of remembering, I would assume, the death of his comrades and the death of his other comrades on the previous planet that they were certainly just on. It feels like he's dealing with some sort of PTSD, some shock and awe of his own, and not really sure what to do next besides maybe get revenge on this Andor character. So, who Cyril grows up to be in this series, I have no idea. But if I had to assume who he might actually end up being partnered with, I am kind of fascinated to see if he would get partnered with Dedra, who is kind of on her own rebellion hunt mission as well. Um, and so I do wonder if there's going to be some something that interferes and actually manages to put Cyril and Dedra together for a hunt for Andor. We'll definitely have to see how it winds up turning out. But his mom is talks a little bit about Uncle Harlow. And I do wonder if Uncle Harlow is anybody that we've met before, if this is a new character. Is this code word for somebody else? Like, is Ben Mendelsohn going to come back and reprise his role from Rogue One? Is that Uncle Harlow? I have no idea, but I am expecting Uncle Harlow to have a pretty significant name, or at least a pretty significant place within the Empire, if they're calling in a favor to kind of get Cyril up and running again when it comes to working for the Empire. So again, outside of the character Cyril, I don't really care for him too much, but it does seem as though they're planting the seeds for him to have a much bigger role as the season progresses, especially with his mindset very much on Andor. Um, speaking of Dedra as well, her and her assistant in here is still looking for connections to the rebellion. I kind of dig the idea that she's seeing these random attacks at different bases along with stolen items, and as random as they look, her being one of the few people to understand that they're actually connected, right? While spread out and random, she believes that they are connected, well organized militia or rebellion, sort of kind of making their moves, despite what the person above her in power didn't clearly agree with her or thought she was just kind of, following a terrible lead. But there's clearly more here than meets the eye, because Dedra says, if I were to do something like this and lead a rebellion, this is exactly how I would certainly pull it off. So I do expect her to certainly be onto something, to continue to let her voice be known. What the rebellion is stealing in particular, are they trying to build something? Are these just random pieces, but clearly part of a much bigger picture? I definitely certainly do believe so. And I'm kind of curious if she'll find out about the attack on Aldani and the heist, and if she manages to make a connection to Andor and maybe find Cyril, who has been looking for Andor, or at least come into contact with him. So I think he's probably a great point of emphasis for somebody like Dedra to at least speak to and connect with. And then last but not least, it's just the Mon Mothma stuff, which felt like a kind of a waste, a little bit of a throwaway, if you will, in this. I almost didn't necessarily even need her in this episode. Like, for me, the episode just continued to establish the fact that she clearly has some family issues. Her and her husband very much estranged. It feels like, sitting separate from each other, not holding hands. There's really nothing lovey-dovey about these two. I do wonder if at one point in time they were like that, and then just power and politics just kind of separated them, because it feels very much like they have two completely different mentalities, right? Like, the idea of them driving home in their squeaky clean, shiny automobile or hovermobile, whatever you want to call it. The idea of them he mentions, oh, why don't you tell me about your latest endeavor? And he says, oh, because it's a foundation and it's about helping people. I didn't think you would be into that. And he doesn't say anything besides, let's take the expressway. I'm just ready to get home. Like, just the back and forth between these two, man, it's just unbelievable to kind of see Mon Mothma and her husband in this situation. And I thought it was him going to be the only one that gave some pushback, but it's clearly the daughter too. And so it does make me wonder, like, Mon Mothma, like, are you a terrible mom and a terrible wife? Like, have you gotten so deep into the concept of the rebellion that you've come to only think of yourself and nobody else, and everybody else in your family sees it? Or is your family just a bunch of dicks? Like, it's just everybody just mean to you all the time? I am kind of curious where this animosity and the back talkativeness from her daughter comes from. I mean, granted, look, I would probably be pissed too if I didn't have to be to school or early and my mom's talking about dropping me off early. Nah, no, that'll take me. So it's the idea also of Mon Mothma not understanding that and not being cool with that makes me raise my eyebrow, to the point to where it's like, I don't know if all her problems are coming from her family. Like, I do wonder if some of Mon Mothma's problems are self-inflicted wounds. Maybe she's just not sure how to handle the situations, or her own relatives in this situation. Maybe her mind is just completely somewhere else when it comes to financially supporting the rebellion, and her, clearly having to work amongst the Senate. It just makes me wonder if her nerves and her unease of suspicion on her might make her act or treat people differently in that regards. And at the downside of it all, neglecting her family to a certain extent. Again, that's just one side of it. It could just be the fact that her husband's an asshole and her daughter is just a spoiled brat. I mean, it really could come down to that. And maybe she gets her attitude from her dad, and now Mon Mothma finds herself in a little bit of a family squabble. It was just really awkward in this episode, to the point to where I don't know if I needed that additional emphasis of, hey, they don't get along, because I clearly realized that in the previous episode also. But it was just so many brief sequences and scenes of her in here that it was just more rubbing salt on the wound for poor Mon Mothma. And so I'm very fascinated to kind of see if her situation with her family um leads into other things. So I definitely want to see her get involved more with the Senate as well. And then last but not least, just Luthen. Luthen clearly on the edge of his seat, in his nerves, thinking that maybe he dropped the ball a little bit, which he might have. I think the idea of maybe giving Andor his Sky Kyber, if ever discovered, could easily probably, if discovered by the right person, could easily go ahead and connect them back to Luthen. And so while I think I'm assuming that's his wife, whoever his coworker is in this sort of historical, like, antique shop. I'm assuming that's his wife, but maybe it's just his coworker. But regardless, the fact that she's pointing out his nerves, like, hey, just put down the communicator, right? By this time tomorrow, you'll know what the circumstances certainly are, if the mission succeeded or not. There is just something fun and thrilling about the idea of knowing that Luthen is working behind the scenes, and seeing him trying to pick up on transmissions from the Empire to see if his mission was in fact accomplished. Again, tension and nerves, I felt like, was certainly the theme in here. And why did you join the rebellion in the first place? And I thought those were all really impactful moments for this particular episode, and a great execution of it as well. And good old Blossom's in the house today with us. Thank you very much, Blossom, for certainly coming through. But yeah, guys, let me know what you guys thought certainly about Andor's episode 5. Again, nerves and tension very high. Great work on furthering developing some of these characters like Lieutenant Gorn, Skeen, Nemec. Also very thought-provoking episode, to certainly say the least, especially as they're talking about the repression of the Empire and how it really forces other people to kind of lose their freedoms in that way. So the hand of the Empire continues to be strong, but hopefully this heist that I'm keeping my fingers crossed actually happens in next week's episode. I think it's going to be pretty action-packed and pretty intense, guys. So let me know what you guys thought. These are just my A+ opinions. I always want to know yours. Let your thoughts be known known in the comment section box below, and we'll definitely continue this conversation until next week. But until then, do me a big favor as always, guys. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and keep it A+. May the force be with you. I'll talk to you later. Bye.